Good day, everyone. Today we'll be reading from A People's Tragedy, the history of the Russian Revolution from 1891 to 1924. I'll read a small portion called Not So Holy Russia. God grant health to the Orthodox Tsar, Grand Prince Mikhail Fedorovich. May he hold the Muscovite Tsardom and all the Holy Russian land. According to the popular song, Mikhail Romanov had been blessed by his father, the Metropolitan Filaret, in 1619 with this prayer 6 years after ascending the Russian throne. The myth of the Holy Russian land was the founding idea of the Muscovite Tsardom as developed by the Romanovs from the start of the 17th century. The foundation of their dynasty, as it was presented in the propaganda of the 1913 Jubilee, symbolized an awakening of a new Russian national consciousness based on the defense of Orthodox Christianity. Mikhail Romanov, so the legend went, had been elected by the entire Russian people following the civil war and the Polish intervention during the time of troubles. The Holy Russian land was thus reunited behind the Romanov dynasty. Mikhail saved Orthodox Russia from Catholicism. From this point on, the idea of Holy Russia, a stronghold of defense of the Orthodox Christian faith, became a fundamental legitimizing myth of the dynasty. Not that the idea of Holy Russian land lacked a popular base. Folk songs and Cossack epics had talked of Holy Russian land since at least the 17th century. It was only nationally that Christianity should become a symbol of popular self-identification for the Slav on this flat Eurasian landmass so regularly threatened by Mongol and Tartar invasion. To be a Russian was to be Christian, and nothing else, and a member of the Orthodox Christian faith. Indeed, it was telling the phrase, Holy Russia, Satavayita Rus, and only could be applied in this older term for Russia from the very word Russian, Ruski, derived from. It was impossible to say Savitera Russia, since Russia, the newer term for Russia, was connected only with the imperial state. Even more suggestive is the fact that the word in Russian for peasant, Krashtian, in which all the European language stemmed from the idea of the country or land, was coupled for the word with Christian. But when the popular myth of Holy Russia had sanctified the people and their customs, the official one sanctified the state in the person of the Tsar. Moscow became the third Rome, heir to the legacy of Byzantium, the last capital of the Orthodox Christian faith, and Russia became a holy land, singled out by God for humanity's salvation. The Messianic mission gave the Tsars a unique religious role to preach the true word and fight heresies across the world. The image of the Tsar was not just a king, a mortal man, but by ruling with a divine right, as in the Western medieval tradition he was fabricated as God on earth, divinely ordained as a ruler and saintly as a man. There were a long tradition in Russia of canonizing princes who had laid down their lives pro patria et fidelis, as Michael Charbonowski has shown in his superb study of Russian myths. The Tsars used church laws, as no Western rulers did, to persecute their political opponents. The whole of Russia became transformed into a sort of vast monastery under the rule of the Tsar Adamishai, which all heresies were rooted out. It was only gradually from the 18th century that this religious base of Tsarist power was replaced by a secular one. Peter the Great sought to reform the relations between the church and the state on a Western absolutist line. In an effort to subordinate to the church's administration was transferred from the Patriarch to the Holy Synod, a body of laymen and clergy appointed by the Tsar. By the 19th century, its secular representative, the Protector General, had in fact attained status of a minister for ecclesiastical affairs, with control of the episcopal appointments, religious education, and most of the church's finance, although not of the questions of the theological dogma. The Holy Synod remained, for the most part, a faithful tool in the hands of the Tsar. It was the church's interest not to rock the boat during the later half of the 18th century. It had lost much of its land to the state and now relied for its funding to support 100,000 parish clergy and their families. Still, it would portray the church as a submissive organ of the state. The Tsarist system relied upon the church just as much as the church relied upon it. There was a mutual dependence. In a peasant country like Russia, where most of the population was illiterate, the church was an essential propaganda weapon and means of social control. The priests were called upon to denounce from the pulpit all forms of dissent and opposition to the Tsar and to inform the police about subversive elements within their parish, even if they had obtained information through the confessional. They were burdened with petty administration duties, helping the police control vargans, reading out imperial manifestos and decrees, and providing the authorities with the statistics on births, deaths, and marriages registered in the parish books and so forth. Through 41,000 parish schools, the Orthodox clergy were also expected to teach peasant children to show loyalty, deference, and obedience not to the Tsar and his officials, but also to the elders and betters. Here's a section of the basic school catechism prepared by the Holy Synod. How should we show respect for our Tsar? Should we think of those who violate their duty towards the sovereign? For its part, the Church was given a preeminent position in the moral order of the old regime. It was also allowed to proselytize, do missionary work in the empire. The regime's policy of forced Russification helped to promote the Orthodox cause in Poland and the Baltic. For example, 40,000 Catholics and Lutherans were converted to the Orthodox Church, albeit only nominally during the reign of Alexander III. The Church applied a wide range of legal pressures against dissident religious sects, especially the Old Believers. Until 1905, it remained an offense for anyone in the Orthodox Church to convert to another faith or to publish attacks on it. All books on religion and philosophy had to pass through the Church's censors. There was, moreover, a whole range of moral and social issues where the Church's influence remained dominant and sometimes took precedent over the secular authorities. Cases of adultery, incest, bestiality, blasphemy were tried in the Church's courts. Convictions results in the application and exclusively religious, not to say medieval punishments such as penance, incarceration in a monastery, and such a state left such questions in the Church's hand and abstained from formulating its own punishments. Over divorce, too, the Church's influence remained dominant. The only way to obtain a divorce was on the grounds of adultery through the ecclesiastical courts, which was difficult and often a painful process. Attempts to liberalize the divorce laws and to shift the whole issue in the criminal courts were successfully blocked in the late 19th century by a church which was becoming more doctrine on the matters of private sexuality, and in which upholding the old patriarchal order for its natural alliance in the two czars in their struggle against the modern liberal world. In short, late imperial Russia was still very much an Orthodox state, but was it holy? That was the question worried the leaders of the Church. And it was from this concern many of the more liberal Orthodox clergy called for church-state relations in the last decades of the old regime. After 1917, there were many shell-shocked Christians. Brusilia was a typical example, who argued the revolution had been caused by decline of the Church's influence. This, of course, was a very simplistic view. There is no doubt that the social revolution was closely connected to the secularization of society and to a large extent dependent on it. Urbanization was the root cause. The growth of the cities far outstripped the place of church building in them, and the results of millions of workers, having been uprooted from the village with its church, were consigned to live in the state of godlessness. The industrial suburb of Okrenezu, just outside Moscow, had, for example, one church for 40,000 residents at the turn of the century. Izukov, the mining capital of the Donbass, today called Donetsk, had only two for about 20,000. But it was not just a question of bricks. The Church also failed to find an urban mission to address new problems of the city life in that way. For example, Methodism had done during the British Industrial Revolution. The Orthodox clergy proved incapable of creating a popular religion for the world of factory and tenants. Those who tried, such as Father Gapion, the radical preacher of St. Petersburg, who led the workers' march to the Winter Palace in January 1905, were soon disavowed by the Church's conservative leaders, who had nothing to do with the religiously inspired calls for social reform. The experience of urbanization was added to the pressure towards secularization. Young peasants who migrated to the cities left behind them the old morale of the village, in which priests and peasant elders were dominant, and joined an urban culture where written word was dominant and where the Church was forced to compete with new socialist ideologies. One peasant who made this leap was Semyon Konchikov, during his progress through the School of Industry into the ranks of the Bolsheviks. In his memoirs, he recalled how his apostasy was slowly nurtured in the 1890s when he left his native village for Moscow and went to work in a machine-building factory where the socialists often agitated. To begin with, he was somewhat afraid of these students because they didn't believe in God and might be able to shake my faith as well, which could have resulted in eternal hellish torments in the next world. But he also admired them because they were so free, so independent, so well informed about everything, and because there was nobody and nothing on earth that they feared. As the country boy grew in confidence and sought to emulate their individualism, so he became more influenced by them. Stories of corrupt priests and miracle-come frauds began to shake the moral foundations in which I had lived and grown up. One worker proved to him that God had not created man by showing that if one box filled with earth kept it warm, insects would eventually appear on it. This sort of vulgarized pre-Darwinian science, which was widely found in left-wing pamphlets of that time, had a tremendous impact on young workers like that of Knitschhoff. Now my emancipation from my old prejudice moved forward at an accelerated tempo, he later wrote. I stopped going to the priest for confession and no longer attended church and began to eat forbidden food during the Lenten fast days. However, for a long time, I didn't abandon the habit of crossing myself, especially when I returned to village for holidays. And what about the countryside itself? This was, after all, the bedrock of Holy Russia, supposed stronghold of the Church. The religiosity of the Russian peasant had been one of the most enduring myths along the depths of the Russian soul, in the history of Russia. But in reality, Russian peasants had never been more semi-detached from Orthodox religion. Only a thin coat of Christianity had been painted over his ancient pagan folk beliefs. To be sure, the Russian peasant displayed a great deal of eternal devotion. He crossed himself continuously, pronounced the Lord's name in every other sentence, and regularly went to church, and always observed the Lenten fast, never worked on religious holidays, and was even known from time to time to go in pilgrimage to the holy shrines. Slavophile intellectuals like Dostoevsky or Solzhenitsyn might wish to see this as a sign of peasants' deep attachment to the Orthodox faith. And it's truly certain that most of the peasants thought of themselves as Orthodox Christian. If one go to a Russian village at the turn of the century and ask its inhabitants, one would probably receive the reply, "We are Orthodox from here." But the peasants' religion was far from the bookish Christianity of the clergy. They mixed pagan cults and superstitions, magic, sorcery, with their adherence to the Orthodox beliefs. This was the peasants' own vernacular religion, shaped to fit the needs of their precocious farming lives. Being illiterate, the average peasant knew very little of the Gospels. The Lord's Prayer and the 10 Commandments were unknown to him, but he did vaguely understand the concepts of heaven and hell, and no doubt his lifelong observance of the church rituals would somehow save his soul. He conceived as God as a real human being and not as an abstract spirit. Gorky described one peasant he encountered in a village near Kazan, who, quote, pictured him God as a large, handsome old man, the kindly, clever master of the universe, who could not conquer evil because he cannot be everywhere at once, and too many men have been born for that. But he will succeed, you see. I can't understand Christ at all. He serves no purpose as far as I'm concerned. There is God, and that's enough. But there's another, the Son, they say. So what if he's God's son? God isn't dead, not that I know of. End quote.